Welcome everyone to this session. I think we have a very interesting session on hand. The topic that we are going to be thinking and talking on today is retail financial services in India, building for the billion. I think the growth of tech-savvy, middle class, and young population in India has opened up doors for tech-driven products that unlock financial inclusion. By building simple, intuitive experiences, these products are educating the retail customers to their wealth creation journey. We're already seeing massive digital adoption in a lot of sectors. We are seeing this playing out in financial services space. The UPI payment transactions, for example, the last month crossed 3 billion mark. And it's proving that India is all geared for consuming more financial products digitally. Therefore, to talk on the retailing financial services in India and building for a billion, I am thrilled to have two key experts who are at the forefront of thriving and innovative financial services in India. First, we have, please welcome Shijini Kumar, co-founder Salt, a financial services venture for women that is changing the way women consume financial services. Welcome, Shijini.
Hi.
Hi. We also have Sarbvir Singh, CEO of Policy Bazaar, India's foremost insurance aggregator and a leading fintech player globally. Welcome, Sarbvir.
Hi, Hemant.
It's really a pleasure to have you both on the panel today, and happy to have you at Converge at Walmart. We'll start off with the discussion. There's quite a few things to be covered, to hear from Shijini and Sarbvir. So, I'll start off with the first question to, both of you, and maybe Shijini will start with you. The question, is really that you would have, answered, thought, and, you would be thinking on a day-to-day basis. Really want to hear your thoughts. And what is financial services landscape in India like? And what about it excites you as a business leader?
Thank you, Hemant. And, I'm actually an accidental entrant into the financial services market. So many years ago, I was actually, I came from my English literature and journalism background, and I got into the Reserve Bank of India. And from there, I went into various, banks and consulting companies, etc. So to some extent, I've always seen the sector as a little bit of an outsider and consumer. I think that the good thing that happened with me was that I never lost that perspective of being that user who, who always had an aunt living in a village, or an uncle living in a small town, or a cousin trying to make a very small beginning as a very small entrepreneur, and just trying to understand what the financial services was doing for them, while on the other hand, I was myself being a part of larger and larger organizations and service providers. I think to me, and I don't know if you know, I was also for a short time at Paytm Payments Bank. And that to me was an eye opener, because between my, Bank of America and Citibank type of places, where we were looking at people that were almost your client, and you were almost on an equal footing, and that's how you dealt with them. And when I went to Paytm, it was a very interesting experience, because you suddenly realize that you were building for somebody who was going to be a consumer over a long period of time and bring value to you, but you needed to approach him or her in a very different way. To me, that was the most exciting part of my financial services journey. And that journey, so once I came to Citi, from there, one of my favorite projects, and my team used to make fun of me for that sometimes, was Suvidha, which was actually India's first salary account. And the reason I found it exciting was because the behavior of the new consumer that was entering that segment, the average age was 30 years, and that consumer's behavior was very different in how he engaged with us, what he or she expected from us, or how we acquired them, and how they, converted, etc., was very different from, let's say wealth or other things that we were talking about. So to my mind, I think there is a multiple sort of exciting factors that continue to remain. Unfortunate thing is that most of them continue to remain in that space of opportunity. I just feel impatient that we did not cover more of these opportunities earlier, because there was always that opportunity available, because India has been a growing economy. And I think, so whether you talk about capitalizing on scale in that salaried market, which did happen through the 90s and 2000s and onwards, but I think it continues to. So I'll just tell you something very basic. So a very good salary account continues to remain an opportunity in India. So, and I've tried to build it at multiple places, and it still continues to remain an opportunity. And as we progress, I don't want to take a lot of time, but we will talk more about this as this evening progresses. But I definitely want to say that in every segment that you scratch a little bit, whether it is insurance, whether it is wealth, whether it is credit, whether it is salary, whether it is an account, there is always an opportunity, whether it is an opportunity to scale, whether it is an opportunity to improve. So if you were to put it as an axis in terms of numbers and in terms of quality, both axes would give you the opportunity in this market. The thing is that what makes me impatient is that it's still so much of an opportunity.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I mean, there is just so much of opportunity, and that is where, there's a lot of impatience. That's a great line. Sarbvir, on that note, your thoughts on, financial services landscape in India and what excites you as a reader?
The reality of life in India is that we have a lot of people. I think there can be no denying that we have a lot of people. There has always been the concern around the different affluence levels of those people and their ability to, use or consume services in a relatively profitable or efficient manner. I think if you look at it from that perspective in the last, let's say, 5 years or so, because I think in India, you always have to look at things, in a little bit longer time span. Because nothing changes very fast, but then suddenly things change, very quickly if you look at it in a long enough time span. And the way I see it now, that, the first thing is access. I mean, there are now 500, 600 million, whatever number you want to use, people who have access. We have the identity stack, right, led by Aadhaar, India Stack, UPI, whatever acronym you want to use. I think there is some access that has been built in using these enablers. And then I think the third thing which has happened is, because everyone has a smartphone and, which is so powerful, etc., the capability is now there. So what I would say is that if you look at it versus 5 years, 10 years ago, when we had a lot of people, but we didn't have the capability, now that capability is there. Finally, we had COVID. COVID caused a lot of us who would not have liked to do things online. We had to do them online. And now I guess some of us will continue to do that, even post-COVID. So if you look at it from that perspective, I think the financial landscape, which always from to use, VC language, the TAM was always there, right? The total addressable market was always there. The challenge was the near-term addressable market always was a tricky thing to go after. And now I think that problem is slowly getting resolved. And I think that's really the most exciting opportunity. I will say that, many of us, I dare say, even on this panel and probably people who will be in the audience, may not necessarily have a very grounded understanding of, who is this customer, right? And like if you look at Policy Bazaar, right, we are very middle of the road company, in the sense our customer is somebody who earns between 5 and 10 lakh rupees, lives sometimes in bigger cities, sometimes in smaller cities, and is of a certain bent of mind, right? As in they have certain interest in insurance. That's what differentiates us from others. So I think that customer is very interesting, and again, we'll talk more as we go along, but it is very exciting, this combination of this customer and the fact that now this customer has access and is enabled to consume financial services. So that presents a very big opportunity for us.
Interesting. So, the customer is ready, there's access, and, customers ready to consume financial services. Singh, a question for you there, from where you operate, what are the gaps in financial services, financial inclusions in India? How are you trying to solve through your organization? What are the key gaps that you see really in financial inclusion?
So effective, and I've always been a little wary of the word financial inclusion, because it's a little bit patronizing and a little bit, just sort of not really the best way to think about it, because money is such an essential component of one's life, and using a very basic money infrastructure is almost as basic a right as anything else, free speech or whatever. And yet to believe that so many people actually don't have that basic right is very disappointing. And one good thing that, like Sarbvir was just saying, one good thing that has happened is that a lot more people have been drawn into that very basic level of bringing them into that basic capability to do transactions and to do basically having a bank account, being able to establish a KYC, which itself sometimes seems like a major battle. So to me, I think there are some key divides in the market, some key factors on which, so I don't want to talk about inclusion because that's too basic almost, but I want to talk about what prevents a person from really accessing financial services. There are a few very key divides. Gender continues to be a divide. Gender continues to be a major divide because across financial services, and the disappointment that I feel is because it's not just across conventional financial services where participation of women was low. This continued even after fintech revolution started, and we expected that the design of fintech would solve this problem, but we continue to see low participation from women. And that, I think, continues to be a very major divide, because obviously you're talking about 50% of the population. And in fact, I should not even be using the word women, because that is how we look at it at SALT. We say, non-men, essentially. So everybody who's not a mainstream, a certain type of man is almost excluded. And so that, I think, continues to be a major. And then if you go further drilling into it, you'll start unraveling layers of exclusion that have to do with sometimes even, economic status, or even, asset ownership, or various things like that, because financial services are built around a very standard life. The second thing I think that is continues to be an exclusion factor, particularly in our country, because we're a large country with a large number of languages, is also English versus non-English. So sometimes when we use Bharat versus India, which in itself is not such a big binary, because I travel a lot through small towns and everywhere, and you do find that there are consumers everywhere, like Sarbvir also just said, and people are using smartphones, people are using a lot of infrastructure. So I don't think they're consuming consumer goods. So it's not that sharp a divide, but when it comes to financial services, we do tend to be a little bit more exclusionary. That's also because our design, the design of products and the design of solutions, the design of distribution is very much geared to that, I shouldn't say, but English and, terms and conditions in a certain way. And nobody really changes that. And there's a lot of protectionism. And when I say protectionism, I mean, there's a lot of protectiveness by regulators of the participants. So sometimes, in fact, today somebody was joking about it. Someone said, what are they trying to protect by giving us these tokens to make transactions when we keep throwing these tokens at each other? And I was like, when you throw a token at each other, the liability is yours. So effectively, you as a consumer is not being protected. The institution is being protected, because if you threw your coupon and your token and somebody got it, you are at fault, and therefore they don't need to worry about it, which is very different from how consumers should be thought of. So when we talk about divide and what constitutes this lack of access to a large number of people, gender, I would say, is primary. Language, I would say, is not insurmountable, but if you combine the fact that design and language together are made for a certain type of consumer, that tends to perpetrate exclusion almost on a continuous basis.
All right, that's a fair point. Sarbvir, what is your playbook when it comes to building for the billion? How do you see it? Because India is just geographically widespread, insurance so underpenetrated, and looking at each segment, how does it feel like? How do you look at it? What really is the playbook?
So I think, Hemant, the first thing I'd say is that we are still building for the millions. I mean, I wish I could say that we are building for the billions, but frankly, we are not. I think we are building for the millions. That itself is a very big opportunity, and I think slowly we'll get there. I think the way we approach this problem is what I like to call, bend but do not break philosophy, which means that we want to change behavior. See, what are we trying to do? At insurance, we are trying to say that you should come and buy insurance yourself rather than somebody selling it to you, right? So we are pulling instead of pushing. But what we are doing is we are bending and not breaking. We are not asking you to completely change your behavior and say that, okay, just come online, we expect you to understand what term insurance is, what health insurance is, and you'll buy it yourself. We are saying that, yes, we will provide you with the tools, but we also have assistance where, there is a person who you can speak to, you can talk to them, they will explain issues to you, they will, help you, guide you through this journey. Now, what is interesting is that what happens is that at different moments in time, different things work at different speeds. So let me give an example in our own business of motor insurance, right? So we have two-wheeler insurance where 100% of transactions are done unassisted, right? There is no assistance, there is no telephone. On motor insurance, about 2/3 of transactions are done in an unassisted manner, 1/3 have assistance. Now we come to term or health insurance, where probably 95% transactions are reverse. They require somebody to talk to them. So now we are slowly, like this year, we do video calls because we know that consumers are comfortable in doing video calls. So we are also doing video calls. We now have the ability to go offline. So we will now produce an offline kind of offering, which will allow our consumers to, be served at their house if they wish to, or come to a branch if they would like to. So I think the way you build a playbook is that you have to be guided by your consumer, and you have to make subtle changes to the consumer's behavior and not expect that, just because you have certain goals in mind that, like for instance, we never look at what is unassisted percentage or assisted percentage, because that's a fake metric, right? That is the output of a lot of other things. So we focus on saying, why are the reasons why consumers need to talk to someone? Can we help them, or is it better that they speak to a person and resolve their doubts? So I think that's how we move. And sometimes, in the slightly more affluent, echo chambers that we all live in, that can sometimes seem very jarring as to why are you offering, I've, many times people say, why do we need assistance, and, why don't you move to a more product focus? And my point is that we are actually very product focused. We are product focused, but looking at the real consumer in mind, and not some aspirational ideal that may exist in some other market. So
Sure.
sort of that's really the thought process, that you slowly move. And, before you know it, like I said, in 5 years, you go from 0% to 66% without really, making a song and dance about it.
So following the customer, I mean, that's a great insight, be guided with the customer rather than being ahead of time. Let them shape the, the way they want to, instead of, pushing things down their, throat and, going behind them in the way they want to consume financial services.
Yeah, I just say that sometimes you also have to take some calls, because the customers won't, the customers don't always tell you everything, right? You have to take some calls, and that's where I think the insight of the organization comes in. You have the understanding of your customer to say, okay, now this person is ready to do this, but not that. And of course, you change as things happen.
Sure. A different question to both of you. How are you, and maybe Shijini, if you could, give us an insight first. How are you trying to leverage data and tech to rethink customer offering? Is there a thought that you have, where you're looking at leveraging data or technology far more deeply in offering things to customers?
I'm sure that answer is yes for almost every organization today. And as being like one of the newest entrants right now, we are, as you know, we're right now at a pre-product stage, the company. We definitely want to start from that point, because we understand, like Sarbvir said, the consumers change. And we think that we will build for the consumer that will change, so that they can come first and discover this new way of doing things. So you want to be a little bit ahead in that sense of the present. So you want to be a little bit of the future, so that as people change, they gravitate towards what is the latest, because that's what they're looking for, right? So, and that essentially requires consuming data, that essentially requires using technology, that essentially requires using great design, that requires using product insights. And obviously, you when it comes to your customer, and when it comes to distribution or acquisition, you can think about different models or hybrid models or whatever, because that to the earlier point made is a function of how many people do you want versus how many people have already changed to or gravitated towards that behavior. But to say that today, if I'm building a company, and I am going to be absolutely looking at the very, very best and futuristic way in which data can be used to get insights to continuously keep yourself synced with that changing consumer, because that's the consumer we are targeting. So we are actually effectively not thinking of the billion when we are starting at all. We are thinking of the early adopters of the best quality of experience and best design of financial products. And we think that consumer, because that's a discerning consumer, that's a smart consumer, becomes in many ways an influencer and creates, and it quickly influences the ecosystem, because that is the age in which we live. And that trend is likely to get more and more accentuated as we go along. So yeah, sure. The answer to your question is yeah, definitely.
So, Sarbvir, when you look at it, leveraging data and technology, both go hand in hand in your part of the world, or do you think one follows the other? How do you see it?
So I think Hemant,
Insurance has been a very old industry, and you are transforming it. So from that perspective, what do you see playing out strongly?
I think we are playing our part. The way I look at it is that, they say that real technology is not distinguishable from magic, right? So I think that is the sort of guiding principle, right? That what you want to do is to do something which will make the customer suddenly feel that, their life has, you've anticipated something, or you have made something very easy for them to do. It's not just about, I always say it's not about data being used for us, right? It's not being used for our own, things of targeting and, all those kind of things. I think the right way to look at it is that if I am a consumer and I come to our platform, do you see that some magical moment that happens to you, whether in terms of, the platform anticipating what you want, let's say you've decided to buy a policy, helping you through the process, and suddenly, you don't have to, I think Shijini spoke about how even doing a KYC can be a non-trivial, exercise, even today in 2021. So can we do things that will allow you to, your KYC can be done in an automated manner. Maybe we don't need your financial documents. Maybe your health report can be, can be generated from somewhere else, or we have some unique insight about you, which we can use to, remove that need or whatever. So I think the whole point of data and my experience with data everywhere has been that the single biggest challenge is that the data should be organized correctly. See, it's not the fancy algorithms which are the problem. Those algorithms are available everywhere. It is actually the reverse. It is the data being organized in a logical and complete manner, right? Which can then be leveraged to create like these wow experiences for the customer, which really matter. And if you see, our focus is entirely on that how can we bring these two things together. I'll give you a simple, example so that it doesn't sound very esoteric, right? If you have a policy, I can ask you to just take a photograph of that policy or scan it and send it to me, and I can renew it. Right now, that to me is really using technology, and it's a wonderful experience. You don't have to do anything; it gets done. Step minus one of that would be that I know that, okay, look, your policy obviously is needs to be renewed, and I say that, look, I have all your all your data. I know what car you have. Just confirm two things to me, and your policy will be renewed. So I think the whole idea is to use data and technology to make the process of the consumer's process more and more efficient and smooth. Now, I must also tell you that insurance is a very interesting area where there is also another thing which you have to always look out for, which is the insurer, right? Our suppliers, their interests, because whether we like it or not, there are many bad actors in the system. Because the whole concept is that you're paying money in anticipation of something which is going to happen in the future. So there are some bad actors who are always trying to game the system. Now, that is a very expensive thing. And if you're not careful, that spoils the experience of everybody else. Because if I'm trying to, find that one person in 1,000, the remaining 999 people also get affected. Now, that is another area where we work very hard to use technology and data science to be able to identify these actors upfront and make their process more difficult and allow the other 999 who are not really fraudsters to really go through. So I think, these are the two areas where data and technology play a huge role. And I think the industry that we are in is all about data and technology. I mean, there is really nothing else really to it, right? It's basically maths. Insurance is maths, and then maths is applied, to consumers and, by insurers.
So Hemant, if I can add, that's the great points there. But Hemant, if I want to just add something, because I've been in financial services for long, and one of the things that has always amazed me is how much investment gets made into data storage, all of that. Particularly, in insurance companies, you have like the smartest people sitting there and working with data to come up with products or whatever. One of the things that I think creates a big opportunity, and we are trying to also take that opportunity to work on it, is how does your consumer think about personal data? So there's that macro level data and what you do with it, or but there is also that whole thing, because data is a very core element of the trust that you create with your consumer, and consumers have come to a point where they're so burnt by this. Everybody has their Aadhaar, and like you want to enter a building in Gurgaon, and they do a better KYC than a bank does. And I was livid when that happened to me for the first time. Like, you want my Aadhaar number, you want to take my face, and next time I go to another building of the same group, they pull it out, and it's all very disconcerting, right? So everybody is just taking your data. So there is this also this fear and skepticism and lack of trust about what is this company going to do with my data, because it just turns up at very unexpected places. So I think there's also a massive opportunity of building back that trust and giving that consumer some shape and form of ownership of their own data back. And I think I see that as a future trend, because of course there'll be that whole mega level of data and analytics and how we use it, etc. But in parallel, there will also have to be some degree of discipline and sanity in this, because especially with COVID and everything, like your Aadhaar has been the thing that even the guy who comes to take your job at home wants to take a photo of the Aadhaar in his phone, like all kinds of crazy practices, right? So I definitely see that as a problem worth solving as we build for the.
Absolutely. I think the more power in the hands of customers will build more trust on this side, and making it more consent driven over time would really help empower people. Absolutely. On that note, a very different question. We've covered in bit parts of this, and Shijini, you touched upon India versus Bharat, but really want to bring that out. How do you look at looking at closing the digital economy divide? I mean, is there a different way to think when you look at products, when you look at distribution, when you look at engagement models in India, and then looking at Bharat? How do you see it?
So, when I decided to do this, to make Salt with my co-founders, I did a car ride from Mumbai to Mukteshwar. So I like to do long car rides whenever I have, things to think about. And on the way, I was meeting a lot of people and talking to them, because I was generally trying to get a sense of how do women actually think about money. And there was this one young woman I met in a village, and she was working with other women on some government program, which is around, benefit distribution, etc. And I was talking to her in Hindi, and I asked her, what do you do? And she told me, and I said, okay, so when you talk, and she was working on financial literacy. So I said, okay, so when you talk to these women about money, what is that one thing that you tell me? What is that one thing that gets them interested? And she said something which I'm never going to forget. She said profit. She had that one word answer to that, profit. What's in it? Isme mere liye kya hai? What's in it for me? And that is no different from any consumer anywhere. Okay. So the thing to understand at the core, especially if you're dealing with something as basic as money, and, is that consumers will have very consistent needs and expectations. I should trust you. You will not run away with my money. I should, and that there can be then layers of that, right? People can be more worried about establishing trust for their data or other things, but there is always that very basic degree of expectation of, I should have my money when I need it. I should be able to, to trust you. It should grow. And those are sort of the basic, sort of thinking. And I think the other thing that happens in the digital world is that consumers find more solutions than sometimes you yourself can for them. So one of the things I learned at Paytm, because after demonetization, much after demonetization, when cash was back in the system, I was traveling in Sikkim, and there was a shop, there was a cafe, and that time Paytm did not have a distribution in Sikkim that time, but this cafe said after I finished, they had a Paytm QR code. So I said, "You are accepting Paytm?" And he said, "Yes." So I scanned the QR code, and then I told him, "You got the money?" He said, "No, my madam would have got it in Calcutta." So the madam who lived in Calcutta decided to print the QR code and stick it in the shop, because she trusted that more consumers would just scan and pay. And so I thought that was such an ingenious way that many consumers started. We saw that a lot, right? Many consumers started to use the tools that you give them to adapt it to their life and how they do it. And so I just think that this whole idea of the digital divide is very real, but it is not just real between India and Bharat. It is very real between people. So you have to understand that within India, so my father would be probably classified as a citizen of India because a job, well-educated, English speaking, but he can't do a thing on his WhatsApp. Every time he's gone to live in his small village, and every time he has to do something, he calls one girl from the neighborhood who solves his tech problems much faster and much better than him. So I think a lot of this thinking around having very uniform categories of India versus Bharat, I think some of it is getting stretched because there are city centers like, and I'm sure Sarbvir can talk much more about it than I can, but places like Indore or Bhopal or Patna, or there are a lot of towns that where you will go and you'll find some people living like no different from how we live in Mumbai or Delhi. So.
Okay. Sarbvir, do you think differently when you think of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 in the way you construct products, in the way you look at engaging with customers, in the way you look at distribution, India versus Bharat?
No, I think, Shijini made a very powerful point, which I would definitely second, that I think it's that whole, this tier 1, 2, 3 business has got a bit far. I think now the way I like to think about it is that there are tier 1, 2, 3 customers in Delhi itself, right? There is you can't sort of go by location alone. Of course, it is still somewhat true that there are more in one area versus others. Let me give an example. A place like Gurgaon or Noida is a little different because there is a much higher degree of people over there whom you could sort of bet on. I'll give another example. There are newer cities in the country like Raipur. It's an interesting city. It's an old city, but a new city also. And the new part is very different from, the old part. Bhopal, another example of a city which is actually quite modern when you look at it, right?
Sure.
Chandigarh,
Sorry, but the question is, is there a need to think for products differently in the financial space, or you think, there isn't, the existing ones cuts across the length and breadth of customers in the country?
I think, Hemant, see, a question like that can never be answered in black and white, right? Can there be one product which meets the needs of all people in Delhi? No. So I think the fact of the matter is, I was just trying to say that you have to segment people appropriately. And once you segment them appropriately, their basic needs are no different. If you are trying to protect your family from, let's say, your eventual passing away, then that term insurance is needed by everybody. It doesn't really matter whether you live in a big city or a small city. Now, what is the challenge? The challenge is that the person in the small city may have a slightly different perspective of life, and you have to sometimes explain the product to them differently. See, many Indians don't want to talk of death. They don't want to talk of the fact that if I am not there, what will happen? That's a question we just don't want to address. Now,
Correct.
In a slightly more modern context, you can address it. In a slightly less modern context, you have to give a slightly different euphemism and talk about it in their language, right? Health insurance is another great example. Everybody wants health insurance. So the interesting thing is, even in states where there is, a rollout of a state health insurance, which is supposedly free, you'll find that actually customers will say, no, we want private health insurance. Why? Because private health insurance is associated with quality, right? That they want big hospitals, they want to be able to go. But now the challenge there is that you may not have hospitals. You can sell them insurance, but you won't have hospitals. So the product has to be constructed differently for those people. So I think, a question like this, obviously you have to construct products differently for different segments of people. That's, sort of basic marketing 101. But the challenge is that those things don't come in easy packets. They may not come in just by location or just by even income. One of the things that we have learned is income is not the same everywhere, right? A 10 lakh person in a more metro environment may be far more aware than a person who may be earning 10 lakhs in a smaller city or in a rural environment where they may not even be able to prove that they earn 10 lakhs. So one of the biggest challenges that we have is that many people get offended with us when we say that prove that you have 10 lakhs. That person may be even earning 20 lakhs, but they're not able to give the evidence of those 10 lakhs even. So I think when you construct products, you have to think of what is the context of the person, what kind of surrogates will be needed. See, because for us, proving the identity, income, and health, these are the three basic building blocks, right? And these things, you have to have surrogates rather than being able to go directly. So I think you have to do this in a very careful and calibrated manner. Having said that, they don't always come in easy buckets just by location alone.
And Hemant, if you were to flip this question on its head, then, for example, gender, right? So gender continues to be a exclusion category, but within women, when we started to look at and talk to various women, we realized that sometimes the women who were workers or Anganwadi workers or Asha workers or women who had self-help groups probably had a little bit more agency on their money, because whatever money was accessible to their households was through them, and therefore they did have a little bit more agency, then sometimes upper middle class women or even wealthy women who tend to be very much beholden to for their money to the earning member of the family, and sometimes it's very, very disempowering. So the only reason that I think Sarbvir and I are both talking about Bharat versus India not being such a major split as far as financial services are concerned, it's not so much about it just requires a little bit more nuanced understanding than splitting it into two.
Yeah, so I'll just give you a very interesting example, Hemant. Just take 10 seconds. There's this concept that housewives should not be given term insurance unless the husband has term insurance, because there's this, feeling of moral hazard or whatever. And we just looked at the data, and as you would expect, it's not so common that husbands are not, shooting their wives. So it is just a bad industry practice, which we have just carried on without looking at it again. And now I think it's time to revisit it. And just so we would penalize women who might have some income also, but they cannot prove that income. So they get classified as housewives and they're not allowed to buy. So, so many nuances there actually in every sort of segment.
So in fact, we called our company SALT because of this reason, because women's work is like that. Like, it's important, it's ubiquitous, but it is low value. So I was shocked because we treat women as not allowed to invest because she doesn't understand. Like, what are we talking about? Insurance. So every product sector, we have those sort of discriminations. So yeah, it'll take a lot more than just one terminology difference.
All right. So the one final question to both of you, and either of you could start off in, what do you believe will be key transformations in financial services market in the future? From where you are, from here, next 5 years, next 10 years, what would be the key transformations that will happen in financial services space? Sarbvir, maybe you want to go in first.
I think the key transformation that will is the deepening of financial markets. I think the fact that more and more people will get used to what are very old concepts, like insurance is, from the 1600s, but I think the fact that so few people in India have insurance. So I think the biggest transformation is that people are slowly, are moving in that direction. This is aided by data technology, a lot of capital coming into these areas. So people, are setting up separate ventures to tackle separate, issues. So I think that will be the single biggest change that will happen over the next, 5, 10, 20 years, is a larger number of people will come into this fold. And I think while it's a very basic point, but actually that's, in my opinion, the key driver of what's going to happen.
So adoption is going to be increasing, exponentially.
Yes.
Shijini, your comments on this.
Sure. I think one of the things that obviously I was betting on to have happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but hasn't happened, but I'm pretty sure it will happen in my lifetime, is lesser role of physical outlets, because people's time is precious, even if they just waste it looking at Facebook or Instagram posts. You know what I'm saying? Like, I value my time enough to not have to visit for something like going to my bank or buying insurance, but I may waste it otherwise. I may choose to waste it. So where is the place that I'm wasting my time is on a digital device. And therefore, if my digital device could become that place, then it would be better for me. And that's just a very basic and necessary consumer desire. And financial services, unfortunately or fortunately, is not experiential. Like, there's no experience to be gained by walking into a bank branch, zero, zilch, right? So therefore, obviously, physical outlets for luxury goods or brands. So I'm not saying that it's Amazon versus retail, but in financial services, it's a very different playbook, right? And therefore, I think that's one thing that I definitely think will happen. The other thing I definitely believe will happen is more women, because I think this whole COVID experience of being able to work from home. I mean, one of the reasons women have been excluded is because of the fact that workplaces are away from home, and therefore it has been the major friction in the women's lives to take themselves to a workplace and therefore continue. And I think this is something which will, over a period of time, change as well. So I do hope, and people like us will make sure that there are more women that are consumers of financial services. I also think that this small value, high volume, trajectory in India is there to continue for a very long time. So more and more participants, which is already happening, which is the fintech players, which is where a lot of the capital is going to also make sure that segment gets taken care of, because it's easy to say, and even for us, for example, And it makes sense to say that, yes, I do want to focus on the top, whatever 5% or 10% of Indians, which constitutes the large, it is always that 80-20 principle. In financial services is probably the 90-10 principle. But as we have seen in the payment space, you talked about 3 billion UPI transactions. We've seen the, Paytm going IPO. We've seen various, use cases. We will probably see that market also changing and discovering, hopefully, a profitable model over a period of time, not in the short term. But yeah, I think those are the things that I'm looking forward to.
That's great. I mean, we covered quite a bit of ground on, understanding retail payment financial services, retail financial services today on the panel. Right from the, space of opportunity that Shijini covered, the whole access, identity, and the stack that, Sarbvir pointed towards, building for, I think slowly building for millions to heading towards billions. And, I think it is about the right pockets and figuring out the right set of customers to target and addressing the needs. Trying to be behind the customers and really addressing what they want. Like Shijini even mentioned, the early adopters are key, and trying to understand from them and build towards a good sustainable product. I think in general it's a great direction and great point in time for India, where there are all indicators are aligned for growth of financial services. I mean, COVID has helped a lot of things, getting people out, getting women also opportunities, like Shijini just mentioned, identity, health indicators, a lot of things converging closely, which will help financial services in the country grow exponentially. So thank you so much. On that note, Shijini and Sarbvir, it was great conversing with you this evening. And one last note to our participants, our audience, thank you for tuning in. Please do tweet your takeaways from the session. These are exciting. There are exciting prizes for few lucky tweets. So thank you so much.